Just a quick apology if you can hear sheep baaing. It's I'm in the middle of the Manchester countryside at Jodrell Bank today, so at the SKA Centre, just in case you can hear sheep in my background. So today I'm going to talk to you about with a rather grandiose title of what causes stars to form. I'm not going to quite claim to be able to explain that, but what I'm going to try and explain is how we think that star formation is regulated within the Milky Way, and hopefully this may have some applications for extragalactic astronomy, and in particular, what we're trying to do and where we're taking this research next as we try and work out what is effectively causing stars to form, what is regulating the star formation efficiency within an astronomical system. So I'll skip my outline. I'll just go straight into what one way that we've kind of realized why the galactic empirical star formation relations and why these are important to galactic astronomy in the sense that they don't actually work on odd-hour galactic scales in the Milky Way. So we've got the Kennicutt-Schmidt relation here on the left, which takes the surface density of the gas and against the surface density of the star formation rate. And obviously a very famous result, so you get a nice linear fit between these two quantities. However, when you dig into this result ever so slightly, you start to find out that actually this isn't a true reflection of how the star formation is progressing. So if you split this gas into H1 and its H2 components, you see that, which is here on the right, this is for one individual galaxy, you start to see that if you just take the H1 gas, which isn't really actively associated with the star formation, there's absolutely no correlation whatsoever with the star formation rate. There's a tiny bit of a correlation with the H2 gas, especially at the larger surface densities. But as you combine these studies together, you end up with something that you do start to see this Kennicutt-Schmidt relation bearing out, which kind of tells us straight away that there's something not quite right with these empirical scalar relations. We can't use them to actively explain the gas that's actively involved within star formation. So, and another issue with these scaling relations is that we see that there's different when we just use galactic systems. So if we look on the left here, we've got the normal spirals using normal, use your own particular definition of normal. We start to see that these spirals do lie on this Kennicutt-Schmidt relation. But then if we start to use starbursts, so more star-forming galaxies, you, as expected, would see the star formation rate is a bit higher than its surface density of gas, and these don't fall onto the same relation. So we're immediately seeing in these scaling relations, we can't completely explain star formation. We can explain it in spiral galaxies, and we can explain it in like more evolved disks, but we can't explain it in these starburst systems. So that is not working on that scale. And then if we go to the lowest astronomical scales, we take a galaxy and we we take it into individual, change the pixel size, change the resolution of what we're looking at. If we look at kiloparsec scales, we get a nice correlation. But as we make the pixels essentially of our resolution smaller, so from 500 to 240 to 80 parsecs, so 80 parsecs is about the scale of an individual molecular cloud, we start to see that this relationship goes from a very tight relationship to one that there's no obvious star formation relationship at all, which is kind of telling us now that as well, Kennicutt-Schmidt relationship is that it doesn't really work on the lowest scales of star formation as well. So we can't really say that unambiguously that there's the surface density of this gas that is embedding the star formation rate into a system. And the reason it breaks down at such small scales is something that Diedrich Croysen and Steve Longmore produced, which was an uncertainty principle of star formation. And essentially it just took effectively it took what is the star formation rate versus the cloud, and you see the stars, and it measures the stars and the gas within a particular system, and it tells you that how long a certain system stays in the gas phase, how long it stays in the stellar phase, and what's the overlap, which is the star forming region, star forming time period. And when you get to that smaller and smaller scales, at large scales, what scuppers you is you start to get a good answer because you're sampling a full IMF. You're So you're getting a good description of what is happening with the star formation. But as you get lower and lower, you're not sampling a full IMF. And as a result, you're not getting an adequate measurement of the star formation rate, because obviously it's the highest mass stars that maybe basically drive the star formation rate measurements. And if you're not adequately sampling those, you're not going to get the star formation, the adequate measure of the star formation rate on the individual molecular cloud scale. So that brings us to the question that we want to ask, which is what regulates star formation, and as I say, the very grandiose title that I came up with at the beginning, which is what causes stars to form. And we've got 4 questions that kind of come into a very poorly drawn jigsaw, which is the regulating scale, the regulating stage. So I will talk through what I mean by these 2 things in the next few slides as an introduction as to what we've got. We've got environment, which is mainly its larger scale environment. So is it in a spiral arm? Is it in an inter-arm region? Is it in the galactic center? And we've got the internal physics of the molecular clouds as well. So this is kind of environment again, but it's the smaller scale environment. So does that molecular, what's the physics inside the molecular cloud as opposed to the external physics? So the unanswered question is basically what regulates the star formation? And at what stage of the star formation does it regulate it? So we need to look at multiple stages of star formation. And I personally think, and I may have an element of bias in this, that the best way to do this is in the Milky Way, because we have the sufficient spatial resolution to do this on all of these scales. So just to get to the scales, first of all, I'm going to focus mainly on this 4 stages that I'm going to talk about, and I'll show you them in a second. We have the atomic gas to the molecular gas to dense star-forming clumps, then individual cores and where the stars are formed. And it's very much like a Russian doll, a nesting doll, in the sense that you have larger and larger layers with smaller and smaller little segments inside. So this cartoon kind of shows the system, but where I stop is at the core stage, really. So we've got the core with the individual stars that are inside a clump, which are inside a molecular cloud, and which are inside these larger scale filaments. And then in these molecular clouds, the contours here are on top molecular gas on top of an atomic survey. And we can see that they're lying within the broader atomic gas. So as I say, big Russian doll, atomic gas, molecular gas, some dense gas that's started to contract and is going to form clumps, which is where you'd expect clusters of stars and a lot of stellar systems to form. And then inside that, you've got denser regions where individual stars will eventually form. So that's what I'm talking about when I talk about the stages. So it's those 4 stages. And that's summarized there. I was glad that I did that. So you got the atomic gas, molecular gas, clump, and star. And there's essentially a efficiency between each of these stages. So if you want to see how the molecular gas formation efficiency changes, you look at those 2 stages effectively. How much molecular gas have you got per atomic gas, and so forth as you go down. I will mainly avoid the atomic gas for today, but I'll hint at that's where we're going next with the stuff. But so we're going to mainly look today at the molecular gas to the clump to the star. But I will touch on the atomic gas a little bit towards the end. And when I talk about scales, I'm talking about the entire galaxy. So when we look at our galaxy, there's some defining features of our galaxy. We've got 4 spiral arms. We've got a bar across the center. We've got the Galactic Centre, which Steve Longmore famously showed that was at a low star formation efficiency. And I'll point towards that result a tiny bit later. And so we've got these large galactic scales, we've got spiral arm scales, which are multiple kiloparsecs in size. And we've got then molecular clouds, a few tens of parsecs in size. And then you've got the molecular clumps, which are found inside the molecular clouds. And that's where the stars are going to form eventually. So that's hopefully the end of all my definitions. And I can now get to showing you the science that we've done over about 10 years of trying to determine what's the large scale impact of the Milky Way on star formation, so that we can start to see this regulating scale and regulating stage of star formation. So as you look at various traces across the galaxy, there are things that you would think would imprint themselves into the star formation model that we're trying to build here. And the two things that come to mind explicitly in what we would think would like help us imprint this is that, first of all, is the metallicity of clusters. So this is the result on the right here, and this is just the metallicity as a function of galactic-centric radius. That's a quantity I'm going to discuss a lot today. So galactic-centric radius is the distance from the center of the galaxy. So we think we're about 8 kiloparsecs away from the center of the galaxy, 8.5 kiloparsecs, something in that region. And we see this declining metallicity as we go further and further into the galaxy. So you would anticipate that that could be having some impact on the star formation properties, on the molecular gas properties. So the lower the metallicity, you could get smaller clouds, and because there's less shielding from cosmic rays and from other high energy events, and as such, you should get more fragmentation of molecular clouds. So there's that potential impact on these results. And the second thing is the atomic fraction. So I said that I wouldn't touch too much on the atomic gas to molecular gas, but one thing that people who have touched on it have found is that this ratio of a molecular to atomic gas is pretty much 1 in the galactic center, and then drops fairly close to 0 as the further you go out of the center of the galaxy. So once you get to 10, 11 kiloparsecs away from the galactic center, this fraction has dropped to pretty much 0. So it goes. So you would expect such a large trend in the molecular gas fraction to also impact and be imprinted in the results that we see. So these are just two things to bear in mind. So the first thing is, and this sounds very simplistic, so apologies for the simplistic nature of this sounds, but it is a fairly important thing to stress as we look at this survey, and that is that as we look at extragalactic surveys and extragalactic data, and an example, a very striking example is shown on the left, it's obvious that stars are forming in spiral arms. So at the very least, that is something that we had to define, and as actually is the case in the Milky Way. And James Urquhart and Stuart Lumsden produced the map, so I have not referenced that, on the right-hand side here. So the red and blue dots here are individual star-forming regions, and if you squint a little and use the underlying galactic cartoon, see that actually these objects are falling into the spiral arms. Now, I would say that if you take away the galaxy image, it is a bit harder to see the spiral arms. In fact, it's closer to Sideshow Bob's hair than it is to the structure of the galaxy. But once you get that cartoon down, you can see that there's some stellar structure popping out as you look at the galaxy. However, if you put this into longitude, so galactic longitude, the center of the galaxy is 0, and we come around as we look around the night sky, and velocity, so the velocity that's moving across the sky, we can start to see a velocity. The spiral arms kind of pop out a bit more, and the spiral arms take fairly defined structures in this. So the underlying CO data here and the spiral arm predictions and predicted positions are in the overlaid green, yellow, pink and blue lines. And you can see that now in this version and this orientation, we can see that actually these clusters, so these are clump and cluster positions from the Atlas Gal survey, which is a continuum survey on Apex. We can see that these clumps are falling on the spiral arms. So we can be confident that stars are forming in the spiral arms, which, like I say, is an important thing. So now what happens if we plot the star formation efficiency against those spiral arms? And this is what we get. So this is the luminosity to mass ratio as a function of this in this longitude velocity space. So the darker the color now, this is the more higher the luminosity to mass ratio is. And we take this as a proxy of the star formation efficiency. There's numerous biases in that, so I'm happy to discuss the biases in that at some point, but just as a proxy for the star formation efficiency. And it's not entirely obvious. If I took away the spiral arms, it is not entirely obvious where the spiral arms are based on an increase in this star formation efficiency across the spiral arms. Now we do see some very bright regions, so the highest luminosity to mass ratio regions seem to be preferentially in spiral arms. However, as a spiral arm as a whole, they don't seem to be like there doesn't seem to be an obvious position for the spiral arms if we took away those underlying models. And this is kind of bore out if you look at the spiral arm, if you look at the galactic radius distribution of these molecular clouds. So there's a few features to just explain on this plot. So just give me a second. So on each of them, and the red are individual molecular clouds, whereas the green points are averages across each half kiloparsec. And so the red doesn't really show a trend, but the green kind of highlights the trend. It's the average across these bins. And the yellow is where there's two spiral arms. So this is looking into the southern sky. And if we take two measurements that we've made, so one is the dense gas fraction. So this is the amount of molecular gas that has been converted into those dense star-forming clumps. It's a very, very flat distribution across the Milky Way. There's not very much variation in this quantity, and especially when you look at the spiral arms. The spiral arms may hint at a larger spread in values, but if you remember the central limit theorem, it just makes we're just going to get a more accurate mean. It's just everything is still regressing to the mean, and we're just getting this flat dense gas fraction. And the same is happening in the star formation efficiency. There's a hint at an increase as you get further out from the center of the galaxy in the star formation efficiency, but the statistics at the large distance end are quite unreliable. There's only a handful of clouds in each of these bins. And again, the spiral arms don't seem to be showing a massive signal. You don't see a massive increase in the star formation efficiency across the spiral arms, which is kind of it's hinting at the spiral arms not doing anything to star formation. It's collecting the gas together, but it's not actually impacting the process of star formation, in particular, particularly a particular amount. So that's kind of hinting at what we're seeing in our results. And so that's the kind of the first conclusion we're coming to here, is that the spiral arms aren't doing anything to the star formation process other than having these large star forming complexes in them. There's actually no large scale increases caused by the spiral arms. But there is somewhere where we do see a change in the star formation efficiency, and that's in the Galactic Centre. This is the result that I hinted at briefly before. And confusingly in this axis, star formation efficiency is the other way around. So Steve Longmore's result, he took the amount of dense gas, so the amount of gas available to form stars, and divided by the number of star-forming regions or star-forming traces in the masers. So a high number would mean a low, like one of the two numbers, it's either high numerator or a low denominator in this case. And we've got a low star formation efficiency occurring in the Galactic Centre. But then as you come out the Galactic Centre, this flattens out to, the star formation rate, the star formation efficiency across the galactic plane. And again, just to hint at, there's no obvious an obvious positioning of these spiral arms. So kind of again hinting that spiral arms aren't really increasing the efficiency of star formation. But what we do find is that when we look at the star formation efficiency, so we find that this is just like a brief interim summary of what we've found, is that the star formation efficiency is not increased on large scales, especially by the spiral arms. Star formation efficiency is lower in the Galactic Centre, but there are large variations found from cloud to cloud. So this plot from James Urquhart's 2021 paper, looking at Atlas Gal clumps across the Milky Way plane. And you see that is a large spread. It's with a large sample, we get a nice, almost very log normal fit to this data, which again hints at the central limit theorem and a very well-defined mean with just a spread around it, which is kind of what the Kennicutt-Schmidt relationship wants. But when you've got a low sample, you get a massive spread at the bottom end and it falls off your relationships. But we do have large variations across from cloud to cloud. So as you can see from this plot, there's still a significant population across 3 to 4 orders of magnitude, 4 orders of magnitude. So we've got large variations from cloud to cloud, which is kind of hinting at what we would expect, which is our major conclusion is that the largest variations are found on cloud to cloud scales. And I've done some work that points towards this as well. So I took some continuum maps and used those as a trace of the clumps, took some molecular gas and used that as a trace of the molecular gas, obviously, and made some ratio maps across 2 slices of the galactic plane. And I developed this power law methodology to work out where this characteristic scale of this. So if you took a power law of this map, and I've given conference talks on this where I've explained all the potential biases that I've checked for. So there's no potential bias on the maps, all the different maps, the source production, everything. You end up with a break in this power law, which should be the characteristic scale, which is where something different is happening to the star formation. And this scale occurs on the break on about 5 to 10 parsecs, and the medium cloud scale, traced by a different molecular gas survey, is at about 10 parsecs. And this occurs for all spiral arms across these 2 different slices of the galaxy. And this is kind of hinting at that this characteristic scale of clump formation, so where you've got this dense gas forming, is happening on the molecular gas, on the molecular cloud scale, which tells us that maybe that once a cloud forms, it doesn't care where it is. The physics is going to progress as is. That's the kind of the result that we're looking at with that. And again, I'm going to hint, but to just demonstrate this, I'm going to go back to this map of the star formation efficiency across the Milky Way that James Urquhart's produced, which has got these the bright spots, which I've mentioned. And again, I'm going to just say that there's no obvious, if I took the spiral arms away, you wouldn't pick out the spiral arms based on a higher star formation efficiency, but you do see these individual bright star forming regions falling into the spiral arms and into the spiral arm populations. And one possible explanation that we've come up for this is that we think that this can be explained by just the presence of the spiral potential. So it's mainly source crowding, that the fact that you get more stuff in the Galactic Centre, in the spiral arms. So the more things that have you, more you can sample into IMFs and into the wings of these distributions. So take some simulations from Claire Dobbs, who down in Exeter. She produced some, calculated the masses and radiuses of radii, of molecular clouds across 3 simulated galaxies. This is just a sample of 3 of the large sample that she produced for this paper. And the top 2 have a spiral potential, and the lowest one has no spiral potential. And you can see straight away from this plot that the mass range that a molecular cloud can get to is a lot larger in a spiral arm and with a spiral potential. So you've got more massive molecular clouds. And we've seen from, if you investigate clusters, that the mass of the highest mass star in a cluster is linked to the mass of the molecular cloud that it's forming from. So the higher the mass of the cloud, the more massive the most massive star in your cluster is. So if you've got a larger cloud, you're going to potentially form higher mass stars. So if you're producing higher mass stars, you're sampling more of an IMF. So you're measuring a full IMF. But Mark Krumholtz, in his simulations on these molecular cloud size scale simulations, found that you have massive clouds, and they might produce, they might be more massive, and they might produce larger stars, but they don't necessarily produce these larger stars more efficiently. So if the efficiency is the same, it's just that the mass of stars that is produced is different because you've got a more massive cloud to start with. So if there's a standard set mean average molecular cloud star formation efficiency, which is kind of what we've seen with a large data set, you're going to get clouds are going to form to that average. It's just that the mass of the clouds and the mass of the star will be impacted depending on the initial mass of the cloud. And we know that most clouds are confined to spiral arms, so the star formation efficiency is the same, but most clouds are confined to spiral arms. So just looking from the Sedigism survey, which is a CO survey of the southern galactic plane, we see that most clouds, about 90% of clouds, are within a spiral arm or very close to a spiral arm. So they're confined to spiral arms. They spend more time in the spiral arms, and just again using some more of Claire Dobbs's simulations, the longer a star lives for, the more massive stars it's got the chance to form. So its instantaneous star formation efficiency may be the same, but the longer it lives, the more opportunity it has to convert its gas into stars. So eventually you're going to get these higher star formation efficiencies falling in the arms because the instantaneous star formation efficiency may be the same as smaller clouds, but the larger clouds are in spiral arms. They spend most of the time in spiral arms. They can sample more of the IMF, and they can live longer to produce more stars because their lifetime efficiency does get higher because they have just got more opportunity to form stars. So it kind of hints at these two results, and I can definitely, or two conclusions. I can argue about the first one. There's no kiloparsec scale variations in SFE, so there's nothing happening. The spiral arms aren't triggering star formation. Now, we could argue that because they're allowing molecular gas to compile a bit more in these regions, you're going to get more star formation efficiency, but that's a very chicken and egg circular argument. But the efficiency is the same, so there's no large scale variations. It's just those caused by source crowding. And a lot of the results, the spread in the star formation efficiencies, the characteristic scale of the power law, all hint at the internal physics of molecular clouds regulating the star formation process. So, to build on that, if we look at the internal physics of clouds, and what it actually hints at, I'm just going to go back to this slide briefly, is that maybe it's the cloud formation and the formation of these molecular clouds that is causing this, the internal physics of the molecular cloud to set. So as I've said a couple of times, the molecular clouds don't really care once they're formed, they don't really care where they are, they just go and form stars. But if we're seeing variations from cloud to cloud, something must happen to the molecular cloud at some point that changes its dynamics, changes its structure, that causes the star formation to differ from cloud to cloud. And one possible route of a molecular gas formation is a spiral density wave. So yet again, leaning on some of Claire's results, where as the atomic gas, which is in the grey, moves into the spiral arms, into the spiral density wave, you get this collision between the density wave and the gas, and you get the molecular clouds forming in the spiral arms. Now, we don't see an increase in this ratio in spiral arms to interarm regions, which kind of hints at maybe the spiral arms aren't doing this, but at least not forming them any more efficiently. It just happens to be, again, source crowding. So this is a result from Kelly Foyle over at McMaster over in Canada. She took the H2 to H1 ratio in interarm clouds versus spiral arm clouds and found that the efficiency, the ratio of these two quantities is the same across all environments. However, did find that there was just more gas in the spiral arms versus the interarm regions. And the reason that I'm mentioning this is a result from our PhD students who've now postdoc in Taiwan. That he found that using methods from Chris Brunt at Exeter developed for individual molecular clouds and very theoretical model, he could use the power law of the turbulence within the and the kinematics and the velocity structure within a molecular cloud. And by taking the power law of this velocity structure, you can actually determine what the turbulence looks like inside of the molecular cloud. And it boils down to two types of turbulence: solenoidal and compressive, and they are exactly what they say on the tin. Solenoidal is that the cloud is spinning, and compressive is that it's falling in, which straight away, instinctively, I imagine that you can probably guess at which one is more conducive to allowing stars to form. It's going to be the compressive. That's exactly what star formation is. Basically just gravity falling in on itself. And that's what, with this analysis technique that Raffaele Rani produced, he was able to work out the ratio of the solenoidal fraction. So what fraction of the turbulence in the molecular cloud is solenoidal versus compressive? And he plotted this against the luminosity to mass ratio, so this proxy for star formation efficiency, and found a decreasing trend. So the higher the compressive star formation, the compressive turbulence here on the left-hand side, the higher star formation efficiency, the more solenoidal turbulence you had, the lower the star formation efficiency, which is quite a nice result because some simulations had shown that the turbulence in the galactic center was very solenoidal, and that was the potential cause of the low star formation efficiency that was found in the galactic center. So straight away that we're quite happy with this result because it's kind of explaining what we're seeing observationally. And at the current state of play, when this paper was produced, we didn't have data that went deep into the galactic center. So he plotted this against galactic-centric distance again. So this ratio, so remember, higher ratio means on average a lower star formation efficiency. And he sees that this ratio is increasing as you get towards the more central galactic-centric radii bins. Now, as you can see, as I say, they explicitly say that we end at about 4 kiloparsecs, which is kind of awkward because we expect this transition to occur in the galactic bar, and I'm sure you can guess at what galactic-centric distance the bar starts to kick in. It's at about 4 kiloparsecs. So the next step is to move into the bar, and obviously we could into the galactic center, see if this ratio continues to increase into the galactic center, and to see if we can actually maybe give a fairly definitive answer on why the star formation efficiency in our galactic center is so low. And one of the ways that we're doing this is, and this is where my advertisement segment of the seminar starts. I'm advertising some large programs that I have on the JCMT. I've mentioned this in every talk that I give on this topic now, and I'm going to do it until I have a sufficient team to help me with these data. So first of all, anyone who wants any of these data, please just email me. Get my email address off Mike or Alyssa, who will happily, hopefully will point you my way. I have 2 JCMT large programs about to inherit a third because the PI of CHIBS 2 is about to retire. Where I thought I'd apply for 2 JCMT large programs on the proviso I'd get 1, and then ended up getting both. So I've over 1,300, nearly 1,400 hours of JCMT time. 400 of those hours are to observe the yellow box here in the outer galaxy. So over here with the one with the thin green line in. And that is to observe 12CO gas, so the molecular gas, where you would expect the molecular clouds, the star formation to be occurring in the outer galaxy. And we combine that with the green box that's towards the inner galaxy, which is the CHIMPS 2 survey, which is pushing into the galactic center, so that we can extend this analysis into the galactic center. And as I said on the previous slide, definitively answer whether this solenoidal fraction is the cause of the imprinting of the star formation. So then if it is, we then need to definitely go and have a look at the atomic gas and start to look at how clouds are forming, and are they forming differently in different parts of the galaxy. And as part of that, so that's one bit of the internal physics that I want to talk about, which was the physics of the molecular cloud probable formation and the turbulent and the kinematic analysis and the kinematic information we can get. I also want to take you to the other strand that we're looking at and what is regulating star formation. And this brings us back to this slide that I showed at the beginning. I've not restarted my talk, and this is the empirical scaling relations. As I say, when you use all gas, you get this scaling relation. But when you start to split it up into its constituent parts, its atomic and its molecular gas, this relationship doesn't hold. And this is, and again, I mentioned earlier that it doesn't hold at smaller size scales. But when we use dense gas, it does. It fits all of these things. So we have just this first, the plot on the left is from the late Hugh Zhao, and this was what sparked all this research into dense gas, which was the brightness of the HCN versus the infrared brightness, so the star formation rate, effectively. And this was a straight line for a new number of spiral galaxies. And extending this work into high redshift, high star formation efficiency, high U-Lurgy type objects, and taking it all the way down to individual molecular clouds and individual galactic clumps, so where stars form. And in actual fact, there's an even more extended version of this plot where you look at individual young stars. And this relationship remains straight over 10, 12 orders of magnitude of luminosity, and using the dense gas versus the infrared luminosity, which is telling us something about what is regulating the star formation efficiency and the star formation rate, and it's the dense gas. The dense gas is clearly important in the process, and it kind of brings to the second summary that I've gone for, which is star formation relations work, but on whole galaxies, but fall down on cloud scales. But this dense gas relationship survives all scales. And one thing that is very interesting about this scale is that there's a lot of dense gas in the galactic center, but again, it falls below this line. So again, what you would expect if the low star formation efficiency, it does fall below this line. So by looking at all this, it's kind of telling us that dense gas is important in understanding how the star formation process works, but we don't know how. And one potential way of looking at this is that there's two theories on how it's regulating star formation efficiency. One from Mark Grumholtz again, one from Charlie Larder, and they have two competing results that don't work together. One is that it's completely controlled by the free fall time, so how long is it going to take to collapse in on itself? And you get a nice straight line fit with this. So that's potential hint that that's going to work. But we also find that it's just the amount of dense gas that you have. So if you have enough dense gas above a certain density, and then plot that against the star formation rate, you also get this straight line and this empirical law that seems to work. So we kind of want to work out which one of these two theories is the correct one, and which is regulating star formation rate and efficiency, or if it differs in environment. And one way to do this is to take the other half of my brilliant plan of getting two JCMT large programs, which is to observe a large sample of star-forming regions or dense gas accumulations in the central molecular zone and aren't necessarily forming stars across the galactic plane, so in the inner galaxy, outer galaxy, in the central molecular zone. Observe them in two dense gas traces. HCN was the primary one looked for, but we can get HCO, which is another excellent dense gas tracer, for free. And we can have a look at what the dense gas looks like in all of these star-forming regions. They were mass selected to be above the mass sensitivity of individual molecular clouds in galaxies outside of the local group when observed with ALMA. So everything that we're observing in this survey would be observable in extragalactic systems. And this is the major survey. So this is just the very first bit of data that we have. So this is just a two-color image of the HCN and HCO plus with some contours of CO put on top of it. I'm currently writing this up to be a survey description paper for this survey. But there is a massive amount of star-forming regions included in this survey. I apologize for the terrible acronym of massive active JCMT observed regions of star formation, but it's the best I could come up with. But we have a massive amount of regions. I'm hoping to come down to Hertfordshire at some point to talk in person to a few people about this survey. But again, your favorite region is probably in this survey if you're a star formation scientist. So please email me to if you want to have a look at the data. And that's the end of my science adverts. So it's not the end of my adverts, but it's the end of my science adverts. But to conclude, I'm going to bring back to my jigsaw that I showed at the beginning and bring up the 4 questions that we had. What causes star to form? What's the regulated scale, stage, the internal physics of clouds, and the environment? So the regulated scale appears to be on the scale of individual molecular clouds. And the regulating scale, is it on the formation of the molecular clouds or the production of stars? We don't know, but we're hinting at the formation of the molecular clouds. That seems to be, if I was going to put my hat on and something, and my money on something, it would be that. We've got the environment. No large-scale environment seems to have an impact, other than maybe the Galactic Centre and the bar. But again, we've got insufficient data at the minute to see if the turbulent properties do change in there. But the turbulent physics, so it's the internal physics of clouds, so the turbulent physics, all the dense gas physics seems to be what is regulating the star formation process, which is where we're heading with our next bit of the research and our next process in trying to understand galactic star formation. And to bring it nicely to my last advert about galactic star formation, I will be holding a conference on this in Armagh in September for any potentially interested parties. That very unprofessional looking QR code that produced by Google Chrome will take you to the website. Will tell you how to submit an abstract. We've not quite opened registration just yet, but that will be coming in the next, hopefully, 2 weeks, just awaiting some decisions on funding. And yeah, thank you everyone for listening, and I'm happy now to take some questions.
Thank you. Thank you, David. There was applause in the room, although probably Zoom edited it out. So I thought it was a very nice talk, and we've got plenty of time for questions. So if you have a question, either write it in the Slack and I will read it out, or unmute yourself and ask it yourself. Or if you're in the room, ask. Go ahead and ask. Rob. Yeah.
So if I have a galaxy formation simulation and I want to use Schmidt type star formation law, maybe with a free full time direction, down to what spatial scales can I go? What spatial resolution can the simulation have before I can't use that in a picture?
Well, the observational data seem to say that it starts to fall down at a half a kiloparsec scale. You start to definitely at that scale, you're getting a hint at it, but then below that, you're starting to see these relationships start to fall down. Now, this is on the formation of the stars. That might, as you're putting it into prescribing it in, it might be okay because the stars obviously haven't drifted from where the gas has formed yet. But observationally, we see that on the larger scales, and as time progresses, within these systems, that the stars have drifted from where the gas has formed. So that's why if you, sorry, let me just go back to the slide that I had. We go back to this one. If we go back to this slide from this result, we see that as you get to the individual molecular clouds, there's absolutely no Kennicutt-Schmidt appearing in it. But as you can see in the 500, you can kind of see that this law still exists. And then it starts to go at scales below than that. And it all comes back to this, really, in the like the uncertainty that you get less uncertainty as you get further out, because you're starting to sample a full IMF, but it's that drift in the middle is quite harsh, on the smaller scales. When you start to get, when your aperture is very small, you're not getting the stars and the gas that were actually actively involved in the same process connected anymore.
So the 10 parsec scale where you saw the break in your power launch, that's a different.
Yeah. So I didn't quite get all. I just heard 10 kiloparsec.
Yeah, so 10 parsec break. What does that signify?
So sorry, it's
The 10 parsec break, what does that signify?
well, that kind of what we think that signifies in our interpretation of that result was that sorry, I've gone past it, haven't I? What that is kind of that's signifying that we think that if we were going to see a large impact at the spiral arms, you would expect this break to occur on the larger parsec scales. So this is where you see an increase in the clump formation efficiency, so that when we see it on this individual molecular cloud scale, we think that this is where the interpretation that we had was that the turbulence of the molecular cloud has then been set. The molecular cloud has broken away from whatever gas, and you've got the gas is then going to collapse in and form the clumps itself, so that any dominant scale of these molecular cloud, this clump formation is occurring on these individual molecular cloud scales. So the molecular cloud doesn't care about where it's formed. It's just that molecular cloud is formed, and that's where we see a dominant scale of clump formation efficiency. So there's the cloud to cloud variations of that's the scale at which you see these largest variations, which is where you're going to get this clump formation efficiency increasing, which is and like the spread increasing, which is on the individual cloud scale. So it's at that point you then get your spread of values, which we see here. We see that this spread then occurs, which is what's happening, what we're seeing observationally.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I've got a question.
Okay.
So you made this point about the difference between solenoidal turbulence and compressive turbulence. And so I was wondering about how this relates to the physics of actual molecular clouds in different regions of the galaxy. So one question is, what would be driving this solenoidal turbulence? i.e., is it shear that's higher in the inner galaxy?
Yeah.
And then the other bit of this is, if you had driving some sort of driver of solenoidal turbulence, would you expect all the way down the different length scales? Would you expect it to continue as solenoidal turbulence, or would it end up being more of a even ratio between compressive and solenoidal once you get to the scale of individual clouds?
So, so to answer the second question first, just to jump in on that one, that we've only looked at the full scale of the molecular cloud. One thing we would like to do is to get more high resolution data and start to go smaller and see how the fraction changes, as you get within the molecular cloud. We're just looking at the global molecular cloud property. That is on a, as you can possibly tell with the amount of data we have for these surveys, we've got a long list of potential projects. So that is one thing that we are looking at, is to on what scale does it then, what happens within that scale of the molecular cloud. But these data that we've done it on at the minute aren't sufficient to actually answer that. The first question about the physical causes. So the compressive is a bit easier to handle because you've got things like potentially triggered star formation, if you believe triggered star formation. So that's compressing clouds together. You get just the spiral density wave itself can push things together, and compressive and everything. We have just submitted a paper looking at the shear in molecular clouds as a function of galactocentric distance and position in the galaxy, and we see no evidence of shear changing as a function of across the galaxy. So we're not, it kind of doesn't answer your question, but because we don't know the answer at the minute, we have just submitted, as I say, we received the referee's report yesterday about this, and there's no evidence that shear is having an impact, and there's no real correlation with this solenoidal fraction. So it's a bit of a mystery to us where this solenoidal fraction comes from. But that is something we are actively working on, is looking at the shear of the galaxy with these things. So, and again, I say I'm gonna lean on the fact we've got all this extra data that we're looking into, and we're hopefully going to extend our lever arm of galactocentric radius and hopefully get a result. We can basically publish the same papers again, just with a wider galactocentric radius distribution. So yeah, it is something we've worked on, but I've not got the answer for you at the minute, because we have presented a very interesting no result paper at the minute. So
Yeah, Phil.
What you're currently showing with the atmospheric star formation efficiency between clouds, could
Yeah.
the x-axis that be a time axis that the ones with low efficiency are only just formed as clouds but not formed stars yet, whereas the ones with high efficiency have more or less formed most of the stars and most of the gas is now going away?
It could well be. This is something that I did some similar work looking at that in one of my earlier papers, and I just show these plots because James has got a much larger sample than I had looking at it. But we looked at when you took into account if you took larger bins and you put in all the clouds that were forming, like if you looked at individual clumps and you took the clumps that weren't forming stars and the ones that were forming stars, and you accounted for the ones that were forming stars and then didn't account for them, you saw that any peak in the star formation efficiency disappeared when you accounted for just the ones actively forming stars. So it is possibly that you do have there is another factor in this, which is the time gradient. So yeah, it is something we have hinted at in previous papers. It's just I don't show those plots anymore because we've got nicer samples to show it. But yes, that is something that we have looked into and thought about a little bit. Yeah, and it's one thing that actually a colleague of mine is looking into with the dense gas stuff. We're looking at like timings and things at the minute. So it is something that we're like actively working on that. Yeah.
It's just something that Jan Forbrick here mentioned to me because his thesis work on about 8 nearby clouds was discussing things like the pipe net. There's lots of dense gas, but hardly any star formation.
Yeah.
People say the stars are just about to form.
Yep. Yeah. No, I'm giving some very wishy-washy answers here. But yes, it's something we're working on or something we've thought about. But it is the answer that I got to give. It's that it is something that we've thought about, and it is something that has like niggled at us. And if I can just get a team of about 100 people to work on the 1,400 hours of data, I might start to dig into all of these things. But yeah, it's definitely something that we can that I'd consider as a potential potential cause of this as well. Yeah.
Any other questions from online? I've got maybe a bit of a follow-up question about the same plot. So with how do you define a molecular cloud in the various surveys, either the ones that you're doing now or these earlier ones from James Eckert? And does that affect the star formation efficiency that you derive for the cloud, where you draw the boundaries and like what do you one cloud versus like separate clouds?
That's a good question. We did do a study with when we were doing the turbulence work, when Raffaele was doing the turbulence work, he produced a new catalogue of molecular clouds, which used a different segmentation methodology. So, so in theory, you should get a completely different set of molecular clouds coming from. And I don't believe there are a number of quantities calculated in his comparison paper, but I don't believe he did the star formation efficiency, and I believe that the reason he didn't do that is because the catalog he was comparing to also didn't. But we found no difference in the molecular cloud properties, so I'd imagine that you get no difference in the how the star formation efficiency is derived. We still see a similar spread when you look at the individual, the clumps inside the individual molecular clouds. So instead of summing up the whole molecular gas, you use the infrared emission associated with the individual clumps, and work out the star formation efficiency of the clumps rather than the whole cloud, and we still get a similar spread. So I'm imagining it doesn't change the results because we're not seeing any difference in cloud properties, and we still see this result on a small scale. Actually, in fact, if you go to a smaller size scale, you just see a tiny bit less spread. It just brings the spread down a tiny little bit, but you still see this log normal variation across the individual clumps. So that's going to be my answer, but we haven't really investigated a lot of different segmentation, because essentially, whenever we've looked at different source extraction methods across other surveys, you end up with the same result, just a different algorithm that's detecting new molecular clouds in the first place.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Yeah, well, thank you, David.
Thank you.
I thought that was very nice.
Thank you very much. And as I say, I hope to see you all in person at some point. So